we are a world running out of clean water. We were all taught back in about grade 6 that this wasn't possible, that we have a certain amount of finite water and it goes around and around in the hydrologic cycle and it can't go anywhere. But that's not, I mean, yes, of course it's still in the world somewhere, but what humans are doing is that we are polluting, mismanaging, and most importantly displacing land-based water to the places that we can no longer get at it. A recent study found that at least a quarter of the rising oceans, of the cause of the rising oceans, is not climate change as we have understood it, but in fact the displacement of land-based water through major cities and industry and so on to be dumped into oceans. There's a recent study, again coordinated, this one coordinated by the United Nations, on groundwater takings around the world, and we are doubling groundwater takings every 20 years. This study said they hadn't separately studied the Great Lakes, but if the Great Lakes are being depleted as quickly as the global groundwater around the world, the study said, it would be, the Great Lakes could be bone dry in 80 years. Couldn't make that up. I mean, we know the Alberta aquifer in the United States, that great aquifer that has been the breadbasket for the U.S., will be gone in our lifetime. That is a statement from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They say it's not a case of when, it's not a case of if, it's just simply a case now of adaptation. We are literally using the groundwater of future generations in one generation. And so as a result, we are a planet running out of accessible clean water. Another study, and then I'll stop with the studies, was done through the World Bank with many universities and research centers around the world, and they said that the demand for fresh water is growing so much faster than supply that by the year 2030, which is not very far away, demand for water will outstrip supply by 40%. Now try to have a picture of what we're dealing with here. As it is, every 3.5 seconds in the global south, a child dies of waterborne disease. And here, you know, we have in this country abundance of water, not as much as everyone says, obviously. I mean, until recently, Environment Canada used to say we have 20% of the world's fresh water. We have about 6 to 7% of the world's available fresh water. But we do have an abundance of water. And when we start to look at the ELA and other freshwater bodies in this country, I argue because of the crisis that's here and in parts of the world and coming everywhere around water, that any country that is as blessed with water resources as we are has a special responsibility to take care of that water for future generations, but also to use that water to help learn how, exactly what the ELA has been doing. What is it that harms water? What is it that makes water well again? And I would argue that we have an absolutely special responsibility. It is urgent that we protect it. But not only are we not taking care of it, and I'm talking here in the past, and only have to look at Lake Winnipeg to understand what we're dealing with, but now we have a whole new assault on Canada's freshwater with the Stephen Harper federal government. And I want to say that my organization, the Council of Canadians, is nonpartisan. We reserve the right to be as angry at any government of any political stripe as we are at this one. So I just want to... progressive conservatives to speak up, and we need to ask them to do so. But this new danger is, here is how I see what's happening. I believe that the Harper government has a vision. I think that Stephen Harper wants Canada to be an economic superpower. And he wants it to become an economic superpower based on rampant exploitation of our resources, particularly energy in the tar sands, also fracking, also mineral exploration. And this requires ruthless removal of all the obstacles to unlimited exploitation. And I believe he said this in a number of ways, and if we have ears to hear and eyes to see, this is very clearly where we're going. How does he do this? Well, in at least 4 ways. The first is that he is cutting the rules and the tools that we have had as Canadians to challenge or to monitor or to assess the environmental damage being done to our waters through various projects, industry, and so on. So they're gutting the Fisheries Act, they've gutted the environmental assessment process. It's almost impossible to make this one work anymore. The Navigable Waters Protection Act has been gutted, and now pipeline impacts are no longer considered as part of the environmental assessment for the vast majority of our lakes. Over 30,000 of our lakes are now in jeopardy. Pipelines, including pipelines carrying bitumen from the tar sands, can pass over these lakes without any environmental assessment whatsoever. So gut the rules and the tools that we have had. Maybe we haven't used them properly, and I would argue we haven't, but we had them, and now we don't have those tools anymore. Secondly, you go after the independent scientists and the monitors and the inspectors who would be the ones to be on the front line protecting our water. They have made deep cuts to scientists at fisheries and oceans, and we know that Fisheries and Oceans has actually admitted that they cannot do a proper assessment of the Gateway Pipeline out through British Columbia because they simply no longer have the inspectors. They've all been laid off. They're all out chasing environmental groups to see if they're making any statements, and then they're going to remove their charitable status. That's where they've all gone. They've gutted the scientists at Environment Canada, at Parks Canada, at National Research Council, at Natural Resources, and they have gutted many dozens of scientific projects and institutions. I have a compilation at home that's that thick. It's absolutely shocking. These include the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy, and I find it interesting that their last report urged that the extractive industries start paying for raw water in Canada, which then they got shut down, and I just wondered if that could be just a coincidence. The Polar Environmental Atmospheric Research Lab, the Natural Science Advisor has not been renewed. The Canadian Centre for Inland Waters, which looks after the Great Lakes, had 80 scientists a few years ago, now only 20, and they've been seconded to do a study on the tar sands, but of course, again, from a perspective that's going to perhaps come up with different findings than our David Schindler might come up with. And of course, the experimental lakes area. So that's the second thing. You go after independent scientists because they're the ones who are not being paid by industry. They're the ones who haven't got a side. They're on the side of science, and it's that, and they serve. Therefore, they serve the public. Then you vilify environmentalists, social and human rights, justice, anybody, any kind of groups or individuals who speak out against or even voice a very small and mild concern around these issues. Dr. Schindler knows about this very well. The Harper government is now going after charitable status of any organization that does speak out, and that's why David Suzuki had to formally leave his own organization so he could actually speak out on the pipelines and other issues that concerned him. And what we're finding, and we're hearing from environmental groups, that it really has had a chill effect. People are afraid of getting their charitable status taken away from them. And this actually extends to now CETA, the Canadian International Development Agency, is actually only giving money to aid and development organizations that will work with Canadian mining companies to promote our mining, the interests of Canadian mining corporations in poor countries. In other words, the whole purpose, the whole traditional role of aid and development has totally changed. It's just about promoting this agenda of removing the barriers, and this includes not only in Canada, but in other parts of the world. I've just come back from Mexico, where I visited 2 sites where Canadian mining companies have destroyed the local environment, destroyed the water. People are being killed, disappeared, tortured in prisons. It is absolutely appalling. And this is the story of Canadian mining companies, the Canadian industry itself in other countries. If you go to Latin America, you remember, some of us are old enough to remember that there was a time when if you traveled, Americans used to say, can we borrow your Canadian flags and wear it? Well, borrow an American flag. If you if you are traveling in Latin America, because it's no longer a good thing to say you're a Canadian. This is just one of the many examples in the way that we're changing all of our policy, foreign policy included, to open up more opportunities for exploitation to these companies. And then finally, you sign trade and investment agreements, huge new trade and investment agreements that give corporations from other countries incredible new opportunities in Canada, and give corporations from Canada incredible opportunities over there. And it's called investor state. And the first investor state agreement was the North American Free Trade Agreement, which contained Chapter 11, which gave corporations of the NAFTA countries the right to challenge any new rules or regulations in another country. And there was a pro-free trade lawyer who used the term a couple of years ago. He said, look, the way it works is you could be putting liquid, poison of some kind in children, plutonium was the term he used, liquid plutonium in children's cereal. If you were allowed to do it when you first invested in the country and you have investor state rights, they have to pay you for your compliance with ending that practice. I'll give you an example of how this works with water. There's an American company, a paper company called Abitibi-Bowater, was operating for years in Newfoundland and then left 4 years ago on their own. No one kicked them out. They actually went bankrupt. They left they left jobs and they left pensions unpaid. Then they turned around and they said to the government of Newfoundland, well, you owe us money for the water we left behind. And the premier then was Danny Williams, and he kind of told the company where they could put that little thought, right? So they launched a Chapter 11 challenge under NAFTA, and rather than even going to fight for Newfoundland's water, the Harper government just said, no, we won't even go to a NAFTA challenge, we'll just give you money. And they gave them $130 million, which basically sets a precedent saying that a corporation protected by one of these foreign investment agreements operating in another country has the right now to claim those water resources it used as being private property. And this is a dangerous new development. Now we have two big trade agreements, well, a bunch of them, but two I'll mention. One is this comprehensive economic and trade agreement with Europe, which very clearly has a clear right for European corporations to sue the government of Canada, or perhaps, we don't know yet, any level of government, because for the first time it's going to other levels of government, if they bring in any kind of laws that change the rules in any way that's going to make them lose money. We also have this foreign investment protection and promotion agreement with China. And the added concern around China is that China's companies are mostly state-owned. So if they get a foothold, the CNOC, the state-owned energy company of China, does get to buy Nexen and gets a foothold in Canada, then basically you have a superpower having the right to involve itself in politics. So these corporations are going to have phenomenal new rights, and particularly on this China FIPA, this Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Act, actually says, and this is, you cannot believe this unless you read it, but I'm telling you it's true, that a Chinese company operating in Canada can sue compensation for any decision that limits their expectation of profits. That's the actual words. Now look, let me be very clear what we're talking about here, so you see the whole picture. The Harper government has taken away the tools and the rules to protect our environment. Any company coming in now and investing in this environment would have the right, if a new government comes in 3 or 4 years and says, well, we're going to reinstate the Fisheries Act, and we're going to put back some teeth into the Navigational Water Protection Act, and so on. If they reinstated these environmental rules that have been crushed, they would have to pay millions, potentially billions of dollars in compensation to these companies, because when they entered Canada, these were the investment rules. In fact, it's probably true that any foreign company operating under these investment rules would actually say, yeah, but even when I came in when those rules were in place, but then you took them down and now you have to pay us. And this is what we call the chill effect. We're very deeply, deeply concerned about any level of government being able to say, well, we're going to implement these kinds of rules, or we're going to think about what's good for the environment or the local community, or protecting local water, or maybe even, gracious, think about this, remembering that Canada has finally been bullied by our movement into agreeing that water is a human right. We were the last country in the world, Canada and Tonga were the last countries in the world, the last holdouts in the world to recognize the human right to water. If we were to say we really want to make this real, and the way to make this real in Canada is in First Nations communities that have an appalling situation vis-a-vis clean water, they would have the right to sue. These corporations would say, our treaty trumps anything you signed at the UN because we have teeth in these investment treaties. So I want to say to you that I think this trade agenda is back, and if you think, well, what's that got to do with the ELA, it's really important for us to put together the pieces of what this government is doing. It's really, I think, for us, and here's the other thing in this China FIPA, this is unbelievable. You may remember that the NAFTA provision on energy said that it's called proportional sharing, that if we want to cut the amount of energy being sent to the United States, we have to cut our own use of that energy proportionally. You will remember, a lot of you will remember that. In the China FIPA, we have agreed to do the same thing. If we say to a Chinese company that has established itself here that we're going to conserve in a particular area, from water to forest to uranium, whatever, we have to cut back proportionately of our own use. We can't conserve it unless we cut back our use of it too. So it no longer belongs to us. This is a total handover of our natural resources to foreign corporations. So this fight to save the ELA is actually a very important test case, I think, for us to fight to save what I would actually call our very future. If we don't have independent science-based evidence operating for the benefit and on behalf of the Canadian people, who are the owners, the stewards of this fresh water that we have, we lose our ability to prove what we can see in front of our eyes. We can see in front of our eyes what the tar sands are doing, and we're in a big struggle now to stop the pipelines. I've just come back from a tour of British Columbia called No Pipelines, No Tankers. I actually think we're going to win the British Columbia fight, but now they're moving east and they're talking about an eastern route. But what I've been saying is that the pipelines are the bloodlines, they're the arteries of the tar sands, and if we want to stop the five-fold increase, because they're planning 14,000 new kilometers of pipelines to take the dirtiest bitumen, the dirtiest energy on Earth, all over the place. If you see a map of North America, it's snakes and ladders, just with pipelines going everywhere, taking that bitumen. If we can stop the pipelines, we can stop the growth in the tar sands. And so these fights have become incredibly important. Fracking, what fracking is doing to our water, and Quebec has just placed a moratorium on fracking, and it's being challenged under a Chapter 11 provision by an American energy company that says, no, we're in there and we thought we had something going here, and now you owe us all sorts of money because you actually have the nerve to have a democracy here and pass laws that your people want. This is simply anti-corporate and cannot be tolerated. Coal mining, the resurgence of coal mining in British Columbia, they've got a whole whack of new coal mines planned in paradise. I mean, it's some of the most beautiful places you can imagine. This damage that's going to be done over the next few years is really very serious. And so tonight we are here not just for the ELA, but the assault on science and the assault on democracy, because I think these things are deeply linked. The loss of the ELA, my goodness, we're talking $2 million a year. It is not about the money. You heard from Dr. Schindler's incredible presentation what has happened, what the ELA has done over the years for all of us. I would argue that it's nothing to do with what they haven't done and everything to do with what they are doing, which is finding out what industry might be doing in an independent way to our fresh waters. And I just want to say that $2 million is $7 million less than what the Harper government is spending on marketing for this new campaign called Responsible Resource Development. They are going to convince us that this is all just absolutely wonderful. And by the way, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers has got a new ad in the US, and it shows just Canada and the US on a map with no lines, no islands, no Mexico. I don't know where Mexico went. And it's all about America being energy independent, and it shows the lines of energy coming from the tar sands, and there's no border. It's very interesting and quite shameful, actually. So this is a very bad state of affairs for our country, and I guess what I want to say as strongly as I can to you tonight, that we must stop this war on science. We must save the ELA, and the Council of Canadians is absolutely dedicated to continuing the struggle. So glad to know the Boreal Forest Network is now a member, and we're going to have to keep growing this coalition. We must build a resistance to this agenda, frankly, like I don't think we've ever had to build resistance in this country before, because I don't think we've ever faced this kind of multiple threats to the very foundation of our country. And don't even get me started on healthcare or pensions or anything else, because this is only one aspect of it. Public ignorance is the best friend of a government like the Harper government. Well, I, for one, refuse to be ignorant. I, for one, refuse to be quiet. I have the right to care for Canada's freshwater heritage, and so do you. I have the right to care about independent science, and so do you. I have the right to care for our democracy. I've worked for a long time. My dad fought and almost died in the Second World War fighting for democracy. I have the right to care, to preserve it, and so do you. So I want to just end by saying now more than ever is the moment for us to protect that right. Thank you so much.